Hi, good to see everyone back again. I'm Zoe To, Curriculum Specialist from PCF Professional and Development Division, and I'm the moderator for Panel 3, Physical Development and Learning. This afternoon, we are honored to have Dr. Miriam Lee, Senior Manager, Design and Planning at Sports Singapore. Hello, Dr. Miriam. Dr. Miriam is passionate about getting children moving and active. Her area of specialization is in motor control and learning for children. She'll be sharing about building children's fundamental movement skills by going outdoors. Next, we have Associate Professor Chow Jia Yi. Hi, Associate Professor Chow. Associate Professor Chow Jia Yi is the Associate Dean, Program and Student Development at the National Institute of Education. His research interests include examining movement coordination, development of sports expertise, and in a pedagogical approach where the focus is on exploring individualized movement solutions. Associate Professor Chow will be sharing the importance of sports participation in developing physical literacy in children. Lastly, we have Dr. Catherine Capio, Assistant Professor, Department of Early Childhood Education at the Education University of Hong Kong. Hello, Dr. Catherine. Dr. Catherine has a clinical background in pediatric physiotherapy and has built the research to support motor development and physical well-being in childhood. She'll be presenting ideas and tips about adequate physical activity and quality sleep. Without further ado, let's warmly welcome our first panel speaker, Dr. Miriam Lee. Over to you, Dr. Miriam.
Okay, thank you, Zoe, for the introduction, and good afternoon, everyone. Firstly, I would like to thank PCF for inviting me to be part of this conference. And for my segment, I will be sharing about how you can build your child's fundamental movement skills through outdoor play. So here's a quick overview on the topics I'll be covering during my session. Firstly, I'll be talking about the importance of an active start. And then I'll be sharing about the benefits of going outdoors as well as tips that you can do to build the fundamental movement skills of your children during outdoor play. And then I'll be sharing briefly about the Active Parents initiatives by Sports Singapore. Okay, so for the first part of my presentation, I'll be sharing with you about the importance of an active start in life. So what you see here on the right is the phases of movement skills development. When a child is born from 0 to 2 years, they develop what is called the rudimentary movement skills, things like crawling, walking, reaching, grasping, and so on. And as they grow older, around the toddler to preschool age, they start to develop fundamental movement skills. This is where the role of the parents and caregivers play a very important role. And the role of parents really is to create opportunities and the right environment for them to develop fundamental movement skills. Basically, fundamental movement skills consist of 3 categories. There is locomotor. Locomotor skills basically is anything that allows the child to move from one place to another. So things like walking, running, leaping, jumping, skipping, and so on. The next category is stability skills. So things like balancing, bending, curling, twisting, and so. And the last category is object control. So things like throwing, catching, kicking a ball, dribbling, striking a ball. So why is it important to develop the child's fundamental movement skills? Well, being movement competent or being able to move well at a young age is a strong predictor for lifelong participation in sport and physical activity. And generally, this concept is known as physical literacy, which is the ability, confidence, and desire to be physically active for life. So now let me share some of the benefits for an active start in life. When children develop physical literacy by learning a wide variety of movement skills, this allows them to enjoy many different physical activities and sports later on in life. When they are competent at moving, they become confident and motivated to stay physically active. And this in turn benefits their physical development, growth, and health reducing the risk of falling ill and succumbing to other health issues like obesity. And lastly, children being physically active also helps to develop the child's cognitive development. For example, Dr. John Ratey shared that to improve our brains, we have to move our bodies. So I would say to all parents, get your children moving so that they can become smarter children. And at this point, I think the key question is, how much physical activity does my preschooler need to have? Before I move on to the next slide, I'd like you to just make a guess. Maybe you can write it down on a piece of paper or just type it down on your phone. So according to the World Health Organization, preschoolers aged 3 to 4 years old need at least 180 minutes of physical activity a day, of which 60 minutes should be moderate to vigorous activity. In addition to that, older preschoolers, so those 5 and above, should engage in vigorous intensity activities, as well as activities that strengthen muscle and bone several times a week. To make these recommendations more relevant to the local context, the Singapore Integrated 24 Activity Guide for Early Childhood will be launched in January. And this will include guidelines and an activity guide for physical activity, sedentary time, sleep, and screen time doings. I will be sharing some of the examples that will be listed in the physical activity guide in the later half of my sharing. So being physically active both indoors and outdoors confers many health benefits. But for my segment today, I will be sharing on the benefits of being active outdoors. So the outdoor engages children in ways that are not possible indoors. The outdoor environment provides unlimited opportunities for children to explore, discover, and learn new things. The varied and unpredictable opportunities the child encounters allows for holistic development and learning, such as being creative, expanding their imagination, critical thinking, problem solving, and this in turn stimulates brain and cognitive functions. Another benefit is emotional and social well-being of the child. So when outdoors, children can interact with other children and the environment, and this develops interpersonal skills. Outdoor activities also allow for child-initiated activities where children make their own choices and decisions, and this enhances self-esteem and confidence. The next point, and I think this one most people would be aware, is that being outdoors promotes overall health and well-being. So being outdoors in open spaces sets the environment right for children to be physically active, which is associated with many health benefits, some of which I shared earlier. It also reduces the risk of developing myopia and ensures the body gets sufficient vitamin D. Being in nature decreases stress and improves the children's mental well-being. And importantly, the outdoors provides lots and lots of opportunity for children to engage their big muscles and develop better fundamental movement skills. The last benefit I would like to highlight is environmental awareness. So being outdoors promotes a sense of wonder and curiosity about the world around them and helps children to develop a sense of responsibility, care, and love for nature. So now that you have heard some of the benefits of outdoor active play, I'm going to invite you to pack your bags and go outdoors with me. So I have a daughter who's just turned 2 several months ago, and this is what I usually bring when I go outdoors with her. A hat, a water bottle to stay hydrated, some healthy snacks, and then usually a ball or some bubbles. So that's her in one of our outdoor sessions, taking her sand bucket and running ahead of me. So before I share with you the tips, I'd like you to think about some of the outdoor activities you like to do with your children. This was a word cloud created from responses in a survey done for a PCF parent talk earlier this year. And here are the activities that the parents and children shared that they enjoyed doing together. So some of the things you can see here are things like cycling, running, catching, playing badminton, going swimming, playing balls, and playground, as well as playing hide and seek. In the survey, about 50% indicated they go outdoors a few times a week, and that's a very good start and it's very encouraging. But of course, we do hope that parents go outdoors more often, hopefully at least once a day. So what can we do to encourage more outdoor active playtime? The first tip I would say is to identify and make full use of the available outdoor open spaces around your home and beyond. So things like the basketball courts, void decks, open grass spaces, parks, and playground. The next tip is to integrate physical activity as part of daily activity. So things like walking up and down stairs, walking, cycling, or scooting to and from school, or making it a routine to visit the playground after school. So even if it's just 10 to 15 minutes, there are still benefits and every activity counts. Now let me zoom in on tips related to the playground. I would say one of the things to always have at the back of your mind is to provide your child with a range of movement experiences. So think about the different ways your child can engage in play, different fundamental movement skills like running, jumping, climbing, balancing will all come in. Bring them to different playgrounds and parks to experience a variety of structures and environments. It is of course also important to encourage your child to explore. So explore their surroundings, explore their bodies, explore different ways of moving. Playgrounds itself present numerous opportunities for children to explore and develop their fundamental movement skills. So some examples include things like balancing on a balance beam, a log or an uneven surface, climbing up a rock wall or rope ladders, or crawling through a tunnel. Sliding down a slide also involves stability skills like bending and transfer of weight to get down the slide. In an article that we did in collaboration with NIEC, we featured 5 playgrounds around Singapore that can be used to develop the child's fundamental movement skills. And one of the locations that was featured was the Oval at Seletar Aerospace. So if you see the picture on the top right of my slide, this one of the unique features at Seletar Aerospace Park was a life-size aeroplane Ludo board play area where parents and children can play a game of Twister or hopscotch, which involves throwing and hopping, into the colored markers on the floor. There are many playgrounds around Singapore that have interesting floor markings as well, which can be creatively used by parents to encourage children to balance, jump, and aim at, or to throw at. So look out for this the next time you are at a playground and think about how you can incorporate fundamental movement skills or encourage fundamental movement skills in your child's play. So you may scan the QR code at the right bottom of the slide if you'd like to read more about this article and get more ideas on how you can make use of playgrounds to develop your child's fundamental movement skills. My next tip is to be attuned to your child's physical capabilities. There needs to be a healthy balance between providing physical support and letting your child figure it out by herself. In general, don't be too quick to help. I would say before stepping in to help, stop to think if they really need your help. What are the consequences if I don't? It really depends on the capability and confidence of the child, and of course, your own comfort level too. I'm just going to show a short clip. And this is a video of my daughter climbing up the playground just before she turned 2. It was definitely not something that she was able to do overnight. But as a parent who brings my child outdoors pretty often, I watched and observed and was mindful to give her enough space to explore and exert her own strength, but was also close enough to ensure I was around to support if she was going to fall. It took weeks of practice, and this was the first time I was confident enough to step back far enough to take this video. At times, if your child needs more challenge, you may suggest games such as catching or the floor as lava, or create obstacle courses for them to increase intensity of physical activity, just to get them huffing and puffing in a fun manner. I would say this is especially important for the older preschoolers, those 5 and above, where the recommendation is to be engaged in 60 minutes of vigorous physical activity 7 times a week. Beyond the usual playground routine, my suggestion is to take your child out to explore a new environment, to engage in active play over the weekends. So things like going for nature walks or picnics, going to the beach, building sandcastles. Encourage your child when out to walk, run, jump, skip, bare feet on different surfaces like grass or sand. At the beach, they can try balancing on different on things they find at the beach. Like you see, that's my colleague's son, the top picture, balancing on rocks that he finds at the beach, wade or run in the water, or throw a stone as far as they can out to sea. Without knowing, these are all different types of fundamental movement skills that children are developing as they engage with nature and the things around them. So, and if you really, really don't like the heat and the unpredictability of the outdoors, Singapore has actually quite a few options of what I term indoor-outdoor spaces. So things like the Canopy Park at Jewel or the Gardens by the Bay. These are some options where children can somewhat experience the outdoors in the comforts of the indoors. The last tip I have is that children learn by watching others. This is through interaction with other children, as well as by watching you, parents, as role models. The picture here you see is parents playing with their kids with bubbles. And bubbles is really a good way to engage your children to run around, jump, and strike, and kids really enjoy it. So I put a QR code here with 100 playgrounds you can bring your children to. Perhaps if you like, you can scan the QR code, and if you're finding for things to do over the December school holidays, you can check out some of these playgrounds. So lastly, I would like to share about the Active Parents Initiative by Sport Singapore. So Active Parents is a movement by Sport Singapore that seeks to inspire and enable parents to play an active role in their children's life. This was initiated in 2020, and we have more than 20,000 parents on board with us as part of this journey. And we, of course, continue to hope, to continue to serve parents and their kids to get active and build good sporting foundations and develop holistically throughout life. Here are some of the Active Parents offerings, which I would like to highlight. So we have online content and resources through our website, active parenting knowledge and skills through workshops, as well as parent-child programs. For example, we have an upcoming school holiday program, and the preschooler program has just opened up. So if you're interested, you can check out the website. I think there's probably still slots available. And we would like to invite all parents who are tuning into this session to join in the Sports SG's Active Parent Network. Check it out on our website or follow our Facebook to receive updates, as well as meet like-minded parents through our programs and initiatives. So before I end off, I'd just like to remind you that our role as parents is not to tell children what to do, but to help them to discover what their bodies are capable of or not. And very often, they are more capable than you think. So provide opportunities and a right environment. Be brave, let go, trust their capabilities, and let them explore. But be there for them when they need you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Miriam, for the valuable insights on the 3 categories of children's fundamental movement skills, the benefits of young children being physically active, and sharing also the resources and ideas for outdoor active play. Next, I would like to invite Associate Professor Chow Jia Yi to share more about his topic on developing physical literacy through sports. Over to you.
Thank you, Zoe. And again, thank you for inviting me to this conference to share a little bit more about developing physical literacy through sports. And I'll be really excited to share a lot more about how parents could consider getting your children to be physically active, and also what it means in terms of introducing them to sports as well. Before I begin, I'm just going to perhaps share a short video with you first, right?
Charlie, regarde ce que tu es en train de faire là. Je me dis, elle a la corde dans la tête, elle peut se faire mal là. Hein? Charlie, tu viens avec Lily? Tu vous descends avec elle? Allez, viens. Attends. T'es prêt?
It's quite amazing, right? I took this clip when I visited my one of my research collaborator in France, and he actually built this whole bouldering room in his attic in his house, and he had 2 kids there. And you can imagine, the kind of fun that the kids had, and he did this on a daily basis. Having his kids up in the attic and climbing and just exploring and doing different things. And like you saw in the clip, he even had a zip line for the kids, going from one end of the room to the other end. So in terms of the kind of exposure that you could imagine the kids have, it's amazing, right? The kind of fun, the kind of opportunities to develop their movements and physical literacy specifically. Right? So of course I use the term physical literacy, but what does physical literacy actually mean, right? We may be familiar with numerical or numeracy or numeral literacy, and language literacy as well. But what exactly is physical literacy? So I'm giving you the definition here, but obviously we are not going to get into the definition and trying to just talk so much about the definition, but I'm just going to pull out a few keywords there. And as I read the passage to you, right, it's about motivation. It's about trying to acquire physical competency. It's about also acquiring knowledge about physical activity. And importantly, it's about also understanding physical activity for life, specifically engaging in physical activity for life. So those are the key points that I just wanted to highlight when we refer to physical literacy. Again, I will stress to you, motivation, all right, acquiring physical competency, having the knowledge to understand the value of being physically active, and importantly, to be able to engage physical activity for life. So we hold that knowledge and the ideas about what physical literacy is as I take you through our journey on physical literacy, and particularly about sports as well. So of course, the big question that you'll be asking is, how do we develop physical literacy for our kids, right? And many times when we talk about physical literacy, we also have this idea that, we want our kids to be physically active, to be coordinated, and also to be good at sports, for example, right? And obviously to play the different games and to be involved in sports well. And that leads to also the discussion about sports expertise. And I'm just going to take you through also perhaps the discourse about sports expertise and how kids can develop physical literacy and maybe leading to being a skilled sports player or a skilled and experienced athlete as well. So, of course, the big question also is, how do we get there, right? What do we need to do to become an expert in sports, for example? And there are a lot of work out there to suggest that, well, it takes 10 years to become an expert, or the equivalent of maybe 10,000 hours of practice to become an expert. And it's been discussed quite a lot, like I say, in many modern contemporary works to say there's this 10-year rule. And it doesn't matter, right? As long as you spend 10 years practicing and 10,000 hours practicing, anybody can become an expert. So interestingly, right, where did this come from? Quite a lot of work has begun to basically interview some of these expert players and then ask them to describe or explain, tell us how many hours did you practice to get to where you are. And then they had to recall and to then say, oh, okay, when I was young, okay, I spent how many hours a week practicing, and then started to add up, and it came to probably about 10,000 hours. It's a little bit simplistic. There are quite a lot of criticisms about some of this work. It's not just the 10,000 hours that's important, but really also what goes on in those practices that's probably more important, right? And it seems also that this 10,000 hours of practice, typically it consists of a lot of what we call deliberate practice. And deliberate practice is different from play. It's not inherently enjoyable for many of these skilled and expert athletes or players. The focus is on long-term performance gains. That means really looking at how can I become an expert player eventually. You don't get immediate rewards, meaning that they may not find a lot of joy in the practice itself. The motivation, so-called, is really just to get them to become better players or better athletes, at the end of the day. So this deliberate practice is very much embedded in the idea of this 10,000 hours myth about getting a child from a beginner stage all the way to become an expert or skilled athlete or skilled performer. So deliberate practice is something that has basically been encouraged and something that has actually informed a lot of practitioners, sports scientists previously to say, okay, this is how we identify talent, and specifically how do we develop athletes from a young age all the way through so that they become good athletes or excellent athletes. Right? But there are issues, like I mentioned to you. There are obviously some of these challenges that it's not inherently fun, right? It's a lot of focus on long-term gains, and perhaps it's really stemming from the motivation to try to just improve performance per se. So there is, based on that kind of model, a tendency to focus on what we call early specialization. So you can imagine, right, someone starting right from a very, very young age, to say, I'm just going to get my kid to practice, for example. If I want my kid to be an expert in tennis, I'll just get my kid to start really, really young and have the kid specialize, and I have the kid, my child, essentially practice to be intensive practice in the sports of tennis, essentially the whole year round. And that is really that focus on early specialization. And like I say, it's a lot of deliberate play, and to just one sports only. You don't expose the kid to other sports. It's just one game and one sports right from an early age all the way through to an older age as well. And it typically involves kids that are very young. So there is a tendency to say, look, if I want my child to develop that kind of physical literacy in a particular sport and to become an expert, I tend to then specialize, have my kids specialize early on, essentially the whole year round, playing one sport and starting out very, very, very young. So there is a tendency to focus on early specialization. And this is probably something that perhaps many of us could be familiar with, in terms of the kind of idea that we think, how do expert players get to where they are? Start them young and then just focus on one sport, and get them through that sport year after year. But there are implications of such a focus on early specialization. There is typically reduced physical health, at the end of the day. If you specialize really early, by the time they reach the teenage years, chances are they may have quite a lot of overuse injuries. And not surprisingly as well, burnout may happen. They get so tired and sick of the sports, they don't really want to continue. as well. And that could create a lot of pressure and also mental health concerns too. You can imagine that, right? The just continuous stress and pressure about just having to be involved in a particular sport. Like I say, focus on deliberate practice with little emphasis on fun, not inherently fun at all. And clearly, that's not something that the child would enjoy. If you imagine just year after year a focus on one sport, even though perhaps the parents or the coach or the adults may feel that this is the way to develop expertise or literacy in that particular sports. So there are all these perhaps negative implications on early specialization, as I just wanted to highlight to everyone here. So of course, the next question is then, are there alternative pathways to sports expertise? What else can we do that's different from early specialization? There is what we call early diversification. What does early diversification look like? I guess from the term itself, you probably have an idea of maybe what that looks like. So you could start young, but when you are young, you can expose the child to many different sports. And that's what we call deliberate play as well. So deliberate play is different from deliberate practice. So deliberate play is obviously a lot of emphasis on having fun, exposure to different sports, different games. Typically, it's unstructured as well. And you could just have the kids go, they can form their own teams and go out and play on their own. And that's probably something that we are familiar when we are younger. Probably my generation, we just go and play the sports among our friends and not too bother about having a coach coming to coach us as well. And we just play different games as well. So these are the sampling years early on, like typically maybe from 6 to 11 years old, involvement in many or different sports, as you could tell. And then as you move on into your teenage years, you tend to then involve in fewer number of sports, you reduce that. So there's a greater balance between that play and that practice. So yes, you can add a little bit more of that focus on practice coming in your teenage years. And then later on, the later teenage years, you begin to then invest in maybe one of the sport, and it's greater amount of deliberate practice as well in there. And really, it's just focusing on one sport. And eventually, if you are good, you get on and become an elite or an expert player further on as well, right? So there are some of these possible outcomes where, you could see enhanced physical health, enhanced enjoyment, so this is really something that we would encourage, perhaps, just do many things at the early age, and then you start to slowly specialize later on as well. And so what if really becoming a sports athlete or elite athlete is not something that you would like? You could still do a lot of sampling, but obviously in your teenage years and late teenage years, you could still have a lot of different games, activities that focus on fitness and health, like go swimming and go running, jogging, cycling as well. So you could always obviously go on to recreational activities, and you could see some of the benefits there, right? Enhanced physical health, enhanced enjoyment, lots of recreational participation as well. So early diversification provides different pathways, to become a sports expert as well. But really the benefit is a lot of sampling, a lot of involvement in different sports, creating a great foundation early on in life. And then slowly on, if you choose to specialize, yeah, you can. If you don't, you have a good foundation to go on and do a lot of recreational activities physically as well. And I'm just going to share a clip. This is taken from YouTube as well, where a famous soccer coach talks about, even for young kids, when you think about preparing them to become expert players, it's about play, getting them to play and play. And I think there's something that Dr. Miriam Lee earlier on talked about as well, getting the kids out there to explore, to be in the outdoors, and just to play, to be physically involved and active. I'm just going to watch this short clip, and you hear him, this particular coach was currently coaching one of the English Premier League team, Pep Guardiola, and you could see what he says about getting children to play.
What about little children though? Is it can you play too much competitive football, organised football, when you're 7 or 8 years old? Could you fall out of love with football?
No, in that age, what they have today is just play.
Yeah.
And play as much as possible. In the street, I don't know if it's possible. In our period, was much better. Today, I don't know. And play and play and play, and that's all. And making mistakes and play day after night.
Yeah.
That is what I have to do, and let them. And some advices about behavior, some advice about, okay, we're going to play in that way to understand the game, of course, as quick as possible. Try to tactics, to understand the game, why we decide to do that or not in the other way. That is
So you could tell that clearly, even at an elite coaching level, for young kids, the emphasis is really just to get them out to play. And many times, like I say, unstructured play is good because the children can create their own rules, based on how many people there are in a game and the kind of environment context they have. They can set up their own goals. They set their rules as well. So these are really, really important platforms for the kids to play as well. Yeah. So let's look at our environment here in Singapore. If you notice, obviously it's a built-up city, a built-up area where just flats all around. It's a struggle to try to find places for our kids to play, and it doesn't help, especially when there are a lot of signs here that discourage games. Right, you could see here clearly no games in the park as well. So nevertheless, I think we should still try to find opportunities. And interestingly, I came across another sign, same thing, but interestingly, someone came around and just erased away that no playing signage there. So that in itself is interesting, right? Yeah. So what sports can I get my child to be involved in? And that is an important question that many people will be asking as well. Yeah. Just give me a moment for. So you want to ask yourself, what sports can I get my child to be involved in? And there are options, as I mentioned to you. We can do what we call donor sports. Donor sports are basically sports where you are getting the child to be involved in sports that doesn't look like exactly like the mature sports, but are similar, so modified, for example. So like some example in football, instead of the full football game, you could have small-sided games. We have what we call futsal games as well, where I think it's very popular in Singapore, where it's smaller area, smaller playing area, 5-a-side, 4-a-side game. So in this case, really examples of donor sports are plenty. So you get your child to be involved in many of these donor sports to begin with. It's inherently fun. The rules of the game are not like how it is in a full mature game. So it's a modified, watered down, simplified version. And you get them involved in these games where they have a lot of opportunities to be active, to be involved in moving with the ball, for example, or really just involved in the game itself rather than just not having opportunities to be actively involved in the game. So donor sports are actually very, very useful just to get them to have a sense of what they could do in the game itself. Multi-sports as well. So again, like I mentioned about early diversification, it is a case where you can expose the child to play many different sports and many different games. Try different things, different categories of game, whether it's racket games, whether it's net bearer games, whether it's invasion games like football, hockey, whether it's target games as well, striking games. So lots of different possibilities, for the children to be involved in. And I think it is really about exposing the child, to all these different opportunities. Now, I'm going to share just 2 short clips of my own 2 young girls here. And just very simple stuff that I do with them at home too, right?
Yeah, start.
Go! Yes, 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 yes.
Oh!
Yes, yes. Oh, I mean, oh.
On your side, look. Kayan, you're not doing it without stop.
Yeah, interesting, right? Okay, have very simple games to begin with, right? Like I did, like I just get their soft toys out, and you could see in that game they were doing a lot of throw and catch. No, I didn't have to tell them exactly what to do. I just created a game. The goal itself was get as many of your soft toys into my court or my area or your area, and it just started to throw and catch, and I get set aside a time limit. and we enjoy the game tremendously. And the kids are just exploring different ways of moving and throwing. So this is another one where I got my kids again just playing simple striking games at home, and you just set up the playing area. So the little one was just trying to hit the ball out, and then the bigger one was just trying to collect the ball and try to throw the ball back to the stool, which is like the home base in this case. So let's watch this clip for a while.
Hang on. Striking game. Yay, who won?
Yeah, very simple game, right? Let's watch that again.
Hang on. Striking game. Yay, who won?
Yeah, right. So you can create a lot of these kind of games to engage your children, and you will notice really you don't need too much stuff, proper sports equipment per se.
Yeah, start.
Hang on.
Yeah. And these are just a couple of pictures to share with you. And I think Dr. Miriam Lee did that as well with some of the pictures of the playground and many, many opportunities to engage your children to be involved in really doing different things to develop their own physical literacy, which eventually can lead to, their involvement in sports as well, right? So you could see like the playground that we have, indoor area, climbing walls, even parkour parks, in other countries as well. And really some of these professional clubs, they have areas where they engage their players to do different things as well. So coming back to the definition of physical literacy, again, just want to highlight this slide as well. And just to again reiterate that it is about getting your child to be motivated to be involved in sports. And that's where the motivation comes in. It's about creating opportunities for them to be physically competent, like I shared with you, doing different things with them. Having them to have that knowledge to know that, okay, it is important to keep healthy and to be physically active. And importantly, to do it for life. That means really throughout the lifespan, right? It's not just for certain periods of time as well. And that's what we want to highlight in terms of this discussion about physical literacy here. Yeah. So this is really what I would just like to share with you. And again, the idea is really to go out there and have your kids play a lot, do different things when they're young, avoid specializing in one sport, for the whole year and just doing one thing, for a long period of time. The idea is they are young, expose them to different opportunities. And that's really one good way to help develop their physical literacy. And I spoke about having an idea of donor sports and exposing them to multiple sports as well. You can create many, many different activities without the use of specific sports equipment. You can be creative and you can do different stuff with the children. Thank you very much, and I hope you found that useful.
Thank you, Associate Professor Chow, for the interesting sharing on the importance of providing opportunities for children to participate in a diverse range of sport activities and games during their growing years to influence the development. Parents, I would like to invite you to post any questions you have in the live chat, and we will address them later in the Q&A segment. Now, I would like to welcome our third speaker, Dr. Catherine Capio, who will be sharing more about the topic on healthy movement of young children during the pandemic. Over to you, Dr. Catherine.
Thank you, Zoe. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. As Zoe had mentioned a while ago, I come from the Department of Early Childhood Education in the University of Hong Kong, but professionally, I am a pediatric physiotherapist. Yeah. So for today's presentation, I'd like to share with you about healthy movement of young children. Now looking at it from the context of the recent events that we had to deal with during the pandemic. So I am going to So here, I'm going to talk a little bit about the movement guidelines, and I'm in that process, I'm going to look back a bit to Dr. Miriam Lee's presentation earlier, which is really nice because she actually already started with the topic, and then talk a little bit as well about the rationale, the whys behind these guidelines, and then almost as a complementary to the first talk by Dr. Miriam Lee, which is focused on outdoor education, the how-tos in this talk is about indoors. So in the situation as like what we've had in the last couple of years, where we had to spend a lot of time in indoors, what can we do then? So that's what we'll cover this afternoon. Yeah. So maybe I'll start with the last year and a half or almost 2 years, what has happened. And actually, as of recent days, if you look at the news, even just the mainstream media, we're actually seeing how the research had been showing how children really had been less active as a consequence of the ways that different territories had responded to the pandemic. There's also been an increase in the screen time, and worryingly, they're also finding out that these things are actually having a negative impact on the mental health of children. The use of screens had nearly doubled during the pandemic. There's some places where they have reported that. And even on the another aspect, also globally, they're expecting that actually for the first time, obese children will outnumber the underweight. And we could think about it, and probably some of you as parents are also thinking of the changes or the changes in daily activities that your kids had demonstrated or experienced over the time when there were school suspensions. And it's not surprising. I had a look about, well, I'm speaking here as a guest from Hong Kong, but I had a look at any recent reports from Singapore, and there was this one very recent showing that during the circuit breaker, you could see that they reported that among primary school students, only 4% met physical activity recommendations, and a little bit higher in secondary school students, 5%. And staggering 73% actually spent more than 2 hours per day on their screens. So if you're thinking what would account for the screen, so that would be their mobile phones, their tablets, computers, and television as well. So yeah, you could probably obviously these numbers that had been published recently from Singapore was about primary and secondary school students. For your younger children, you could probably reflect on it. How much time had they been spending on screen time? And note here as well that it says sedentary screen time. So that means sedentary, not doing anything, actually sitting down and spending quite low energy levels. Yeah. Now, it says there a very low percentage meeting the recommendations. And what are those recommendations? Dr. Miriam Lee mentioned some of them actually already a while ago. So in terms of physical activity, the recommendation is 180 minutes per day for children preschool age. So that would be 3 hours. Here in Hong Kong, whenever I mention that to parents and teachers, I get this panicked response about when they start to realize 3 hours, how do we do that? And for the older preschool kids, at least 60 minutes per day should be moderate to vigorous. Now, in terms of screen time, I mentioned that during your circuit breaker, it's been reported a high 73% of children spending more than 2 hours on their screens. And the recommendation for preschool age children is a maximum of 60 minutes per day of sedentary screen time with the use of screens. Now, in 2019, the World Health Organization actually released the guidelines for younger children. So in the World Health Organization guidelines, they emphasized that, we have to look at these movements with the perspective of the 24-hour cycle, that we can't just look at, okay, we want 180 minutes of physical activity. We have to look at how children actually do have that cycle of being awake, being active perhaps, or sedentary, and also sleep. And so that 24-hour cycle is actually reflected in the guidelines for young children that the WHO launched in 2019. It wasn't new at the time. Actually, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand had launched such guidelines ahead, but the WHO adopted it in 2019. Last year, our Center for Health Protection here in Hong Kong also adopted the same guidelines. And in the last year, one of our projects is to work with parents and parents and teachers of children in preschools to be able to figure out ways that these guidelines could be met by children. So the WHO guidelines, they've actually split it into age as well. So if you have really younger children, so infants up to 1 year, here it says there that absolutely no screen time, about 30 minutes of physical activity, and that essentially means tummy time, and longer periods of good quality sleep. And then for 1 to 2 years old, so the toddlers, so that's where we start to see the 180 minutes recommendation of the WHO. So that's where the 3 hours starts to scare the adults here in Hong Kong. And that's for the toddlers. And you could see still that no more than 60 minutes for those 2-year-olds in using screens, but up until 1 year of age, again, being reminded absolutely no screen time, ideally. The oldest age group in the WHO guidelines covers the 3 to 4 years old. And as you can see there, 180 minutes, but only 60 minutes allocated to moderate to vigorous physical activity. I'll talk a little bit about what is moderate to vigorous shortly. 60 minutes for maximum, again, for sedentary screen time, and good quality sleep of about 10 to 13 hours. So here in Hong Kong, we've adopted the same guidelines, but we've adjusted the age. So for us, these same guidelines apply to up to 6-year-olds, because that's the age that covers our preschool. So our K3, or the highest level of kindergarten, just before they turn P1 or primary 1, is about 5 to 6-year-olds. Yeah, I had a look at the Singapore guidelines. I think Dr. Miriam Lee mentioned that there's one that will be launched in this year. I've seen the guidelines for the older kids, 7 to 18 years, and this one actually also does reflect that 24-hour period in the statements that that they've launched, and it's consistent with those from the WHO as well, with that 60 minutes of moderate to vigorous physical activity. No number pegged for the use of screens, but still noting a limitation is ideal, and also that regular sleep is also accounted for in these guidelines that you have for the older children, primary to secondary school age. Yeah, so why did they bother with these guidelines? So I said we'll talk about the whys. I think the reasons for the physical activity recommendations, Dr. Miriam Lee and Associate Professor Chow had mentioned them already in the first 2 talks. And for many, I think my experience with talking to parents and teachers is that many parents and teachers actually do get the physical aspects of why we have to do this. They know this very well, and you probably do as well. Aspects related to cardiometabolic health, healthier heart, preventing obesity, better muscle and bone growth, and motor skills development. What we find interesting is that when we talk about these 2 aspects, these are the 2 aspects that probably doesn't get to be talked about or as much, is about how these guidelines or recommendations actually do contribute to promoting psychosocial health, for children to be happier, to have better control of their emotions, and also that it does contribute as well to cognitive development. As a physiotherapist, a pediatric physiotherapist, I always talk about this when we talk about with parents, is how when they are physically active, when they are exploring the world and they are moving, then it's an opportunity actually for their brain to make those connections about the things that they are experiencing. And so actually, as Associate Professor Chow said, and showed in that video, they just have to play. And so that is actually what underlies that promotion of cognitive development, right? So these are the reasons why there are such recommendations from the WHO, which is being adopted as well by our separate governments. Yeah. So we know very well, the why behind physical activity. What about sleep? So there's also this is talked about less, but there's also convincing evidence showing that adequate amount of sleep is important, because for children, it is all about improved attention, behavior, also aids their learning and memory and overall mental and physical health. So when we look at the evidence, we know that we can see that adequate sleep for children is important, first of all, for memory recall. When they have adequate sleep, they also have better likelihood of retaining the new learnings that they got during the day. And also, it's very important to promote better emotional control, and therefore people would see that as better behavior, self-regulation, able to focus better, and ultimately, as we understand it is important in East Asian societies, learning is very important, and sleep does contribute to that massively as well. Yeah, so if I will I'd just like to summarize that. So why are there such recommendations for physical activity, screen time, and sleep? And we could summarize that into three aspects. So first is all about child development, that with more activity, less screen time, and sufficient sleep, their brains can develop better. They also have better attention span. So in terms of the other domains of child development, this could progress better. Jai mentioned about explained to us physical literacy a while ago. And yes, this is the other reason why there are such recommendations that exist for physical activity, screen time, and sleep, is so that we can promote play, so that ultimately they have the motor skills they need so they could become active adults in the future. And lastly, it's about wanting to have happier children, right? That the greater physical activity helps them have better emotional regulation. Therefore, they can be calmer, they can participate and interact more positively with their peers in school. So, the way the WHO had evaluated the evidence in relation to these three things, physical activity, screen time, and sleep, is that meeting all three aspects of the recommendations is actually giving even more benefits for the children. But meeting only say 1 out of 3 or 2 out of 3 is actually already good. Although, as you know, the idea is that let's try to meet all three guidelines. So now we go to the how part of the talk, and how can they meet these recommendations. I think it's important to just point out that physical activity is not the same as exercise. So physical activity is any bodily movement by our joints, whilst exercise is a kind of physical activity, and the difference is that it's planned and sustained. So when we think about how can we meet the physical activity guidelines, how can we make those 3 hours, we need to recognize that it's not only the sports or exercise that we have to think about. There are other ways that children can meet these guidelines. And when we think about that, we can briefly try to understand what are those what is light, what is moderate, what is vigorous, because we were told 60 minutes of moderate to vigorous, right? So yeah, light intensity is when breathing rate is normal. They're not huffing and puffing, but they're moving and they're able to talk normally. Moderate intensity is when there's a slight increase in breathing rate, and they are able to talk only, the kids are able to talk only in short sentences. And vigorous is when there's a significant increase and they're unable to talk normally. So huffing and puffing that we describe is around moderate to vigorous intensity. So some examples there would be, just putting on their clothes is already light physical activity, doing their daily activities. Active play, moderate intensity, example here would be swinging, and vigorous would be those where they're not going to be able to talk at the same time. Here are other examples, and as I said, light would also include, the activities that they do in their day-to-day life, like doing household chores, packing their school bags, putting on clothes. Moderate would be playing in the playground, and most of the exercise or sports opportunities would be categorized as vigorous physical activity. So now you're maybe thinking, okay, the 60 minutes for moderate to vigorous, that might be the exercise and sports. Now, what happens if they have to stay at home because schools are suspended? How can they be active at home? There are three categories that I would like to talk about. First would be daily activities and household chores. And for preschool age children, these are some household chores that are developmentally appropriate, and you may want to consider whether you'd like to you could engage your kids with these, and these do contribute to light physical activity. Aside from meeting the recommendations for physical activity, we know as well that there are benefits in the other domains of development to engaging kids with their household chores. Now, what about the moderate to vigorous? If you have to stay at home, what can you do? Well, there are explore YouTube. I just put here 3 examples. But there are so many more that you could find actually on YouTube. Walk 15, for example, is based primarily on walking activities and with music, and you could play that YouTube and then just let the kids follow. There are more fun ones like the Joe Wicks workout badges, where it's actually quite fun for kids if you would look it up, and they could see visuals there as well. But one that I find very popular really with parents is the Cosmic Kids Yoga, very popular with parents and kids. And you could check out the YouTube of that. There's actually a channel, and you could find a lot of videos with different themes, all related to yoga activities. And I have interacted with a lot of parents who actually do quite like using these cosmic yoga videos with their kids during school suspensions. And then obviously there's the active video games as well. There's a lot of research around that where they're not the same as being outdoors or doing sports, but it does contribute to moderate physical activity if you had no choice but to be indoors. So that can be an option as well. Now, the third part that you could be active with your kids at home is, what about active homework? We talk about this in schools where we do have active maths and active literacy, and you could think about that as well when you're doing homework with kids. Movement, we know, stimulates the brain, and if your goal is to finish the homework or to work on the literacy or the maths assignments that they've got, movement actually will help them increase their focus and alertness. So some examples would be there. If you're looking at literacy, there are movements that they could do that you could use with the alphabet, for example. Or if it's maths, there are games even like Twister, or you could put numbers as well, hopscotch on the floor, where they could remember or learn about their maths or numeracy while moving. There also are what we call brain breaks, and you could find a lot of these online as well. You could order them as well. These cards where you could just have a stack of cards, and your kid might be doing some homework, but every few minutes you have them pick a card, and then there's an activity that they have to do. So they are quick breaks, and actually quite appropriate for kids because they do tend to be more active with short bouts of activity. And the last bit that I would mention in terms of being active at home is if they are consider using these exercise balls as share replacements if they have to do to work on discs. It's something that we've some kids I've worked with actually do benefit from, especially during the school suspension. So it activates the muscles of the trunk, which is quite different from instead just being seated on a simple chair. Yeah, what about screen time? How about tips of what can you do with screen time? Well, there are a few tips that we call S's here. First of all, stay with rules. You could set simple rules about when they can use screen time and where they can use these tablets and or mobiles, and be consistent with it. So that is perhaps the most important tip about avoiding excessive screen time. The other one is to avoid using it as a kind of an electronic pacifier or nanny. We see a lot of parents, because it's easy, right? When the kid is needs to be pacified, it is often effective that you give them a device and they'll stop. But it is not really recommended, because if they rely on these devices to manage their emotions, it doesn't help them become more regulated with their emotion and self-control. So let's not, that is something that is not recommended. Very important as well is probably our role as adults, as parents, to set the role model. I guess if we say the rule is no tablet in a certain space, say on the dining table, then the adults also have to abide by those rules. Now you might ask, but they do you need to use some apps. There are also some tips around when is it appropriate. I think very important here is that if you do use the screen and the kids interact with them, it has to be something where it's not passive, and that there's also a role of the adult interacting with them. So they're interacting with the screen, but they're also interacting with someone in 3D, in real life. Now, what about sleep? Here in Hong Kong, this is the most difficult part for parents, they tell me. They tell us, our team. Well, there are 3 ways to think about it. First of all is, again, routines. It is important in early childhood to set those routines and be consistent with it. And if that is consistent, then that would help promote adequate quality sleep. Avoid overscheduling. So we do tend to have the kids might be booked onto so many activities that they can participate in, and we just need to avoid that, because then they might be too active and quite be difficult to slow down and get back to sleep early. Prepare the environment as well, and then also in terms of food, limit food and drink before bedtime, preferably not within 1 to 2 hours of it. All right. So just to summarize, physical activity, what can you do if you have to be indoors? You could engage them with household chores, video games, dance and exercises, and also try to incorporate activity when doing homework. What about screen time? Well, set the rules. Don't use the screens for emotional regulation, and very important would be adult modeling. What about sleep? Set routines, be consistent with it. Set the environment as well to be calming, and try to avoid food intake 1 to 2 hours before sleep time. Now, just one question I want to answer before I end this is that we do get asked, what about exercising when wearing masks at this time? Because kids have to wear masks outside. Recent studies show that in adults, as long as even if they go to moderate to vigorous levels of physical activity, there's no real risk with wearing masks during exercise. So a short answer we give to teachers and parents who ask us about this is that as long as your child doesn't have a pre-existing condition like asthma, it's really not a problem. All right. So I think that's where I end my talk, my sharing with you guys. Thank you. We have a website, hkidsmove.info, which is sharing with parents and teachers about how to promote aspects of motor development and physical activity with kids. It's there's an English site to that. It's bilingual, and you're welcome to check it out as well for any information. And you've got my email address there if you want to get in touch later. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Catherine, for the valuable tips and strategies to preserve healthy routines in the pandemic. Can we now invite all our panel speakers to be back on screen with us, and let's begin our Q&A session as we have a couple of questions coming in. So firstly, I'd like to thank all panel speakers for the informative and enlightening session on physical development and learning, like what Dr. Miriam has shared about the importance of going outdoors, and Associate Professor Chow on introducing children to a diverse range of sports and the importance of physical activities, and like what Dr. Catherine Capio mentioned, the recommended guidelines on physical activities and avoiding excessive screen time. So now we have a couple of questions coming in. So the first question that we have here is, with the pandemic, what are some outdoor places we can explore with our children? And I believe that Dr. Miriam, would you like to take this question?
Sure, Zoe. Thanks for the question. I think earlier I did mention quite a bit of possible places that parents could bring their children to. And I would think, I would say one kind of place would be the playground, which you find all over Singapore. I mean, just go down to your block and most neighborhoods has more than one playground. If you're looking for things to do beyond your neighborhood, the M Parks has lots and lots of options. There's the park connectors. So now there's really like island-wide park connectors that people can go for walks or go for a cycle. If you're, I mean, I guess most of you have preschoolers learning to ride a bike. I think those are good spaces to use. And if you want to go away, I guess a bit from like the crowds, places like your botanic gardens or Bishan parks is good because there are options, at different pathways. So if there's one part is crowded, you can find other paths that you can use and go for walks or go to ride your bike. I would say so. M Parks has lots of what is called play gardens. So not just your typical playground, but playgrounds which are a bit more, they call it biophilic, so using natural materials, and that gives a bit more of being the feel of being in nature, and some of the benefits that I think I mentioned earlier about being outdoors. Those can be experienced as well in play gardens. And if you want to explore something a little further, and all of us most of us are still stuck in Singapore, on this small island. I guess things like going or taking a short boat to Pulau Ubin or the Southern Islands, and then doing some of the activities that I mentioned you could on the beach, like building sandcastles or having a picnic. Those are some outdoor spaces that you can consider.
Thank you, Dr. Miriam Lee, for sharing about the places or the different outdoor places that parents can explore together with their children, and also, appreciating the beauty and the nature that we have around us. Okay, so moving on, we have the next question from Chris. So Chris shared that they have tried restricting screen times during meals, but their child will turn and share that he's full and refuse to continue eating after a few bites. So what can be done to help the child eat? Maybe I can, maybe Dr. Catherine Capio can take on to this question.
Yes. Yes. I suppose I am imagining, that your child is finding ways to actually get around your rule that there's no screen time during meal times. I think key there is to be consistent and to be quite firm about it. That even if he says he's full and he won't continue eating, you still cannot. You have to be consistent and still cannot give back the screen, even if he says he's already done. Well, it would, maybe colleagues who are occupational therapists will know the term as well, called behavior modification, BMT technique. So if the child says, well, I'm full, okay, you're full, then okay, you stop eating, but you still don't get the device. So I think key there is to have that consistency with the rule that there's still no screen time. They'll come around, they'll feel hungry anyway, and they'll come back eating. I think you just have to be patient with yourself as well as a parent. Managing your own emotion around that the kid, your kid is hungry and they don't, not yet full, but they're trying to get around the rule, and you just have got to be firm. So I think there is that will be the challenge for parents as well, but you have to be consistent with the rule, otherwise the screen time problem will persist for even longer.
Thank you, Dr. Catherine. So I agree that most parents will be facing the similar struggles about this screen time during meal times or even during other parts of the day. Okay, so moving on, we have the next question. The third question would be, what are the different ways I can introduce my child to a diverse range of sports without equipment? Would Associate Professor Chow like to take on this question, please?
Yeah, thank you. I think it's a great question. So I think I guess it's only restricted or constrained by your own imagination. So I think in my presentation as well, I shared that short clip, right, where I just took out the kids' soft toys, and we just put it on the floor, and they could just throw and catch, as you saw earlier on. Just pull a couple of chairs together to create a barrier. It costs nothing, all right, in that sense, and you can actually that's like doing throwing and catching, which is the foundation for a lot of the sports behaviors or sports movements that you see eventually. Again, it's also about getting out there, and you can do a lot of the other stuff like just running, jumping, skipping. I think, as was mentioned, I think in Miriam's presentation as well, getting out to the playground, that provides great opportunities for the kids, for the children to be physically active. Not just that, but to challenge themselves, right? To know how their body interacts with the environment, the equipment that's available publicly, and see how they can get across barriers, get across gaps, get into tight spaces, and get themselves out of it. I think these are great ways where you could actually introduce children, or get your children to be challenging themselves in terms of movements, and those movements are the basis, the building blocks for many of the sports behaviors, sports movements eventually, like running, changing your direction of movement, changing your speed of your movement, getting across barriers, throwing things and catching things as well. So there are many different ways. So it's really about getting out there, look for opportunities in terms of publicly available spaces, playgrounds, equipment. I think those are things that you could look at. And again, of course, like I say, you can create and build, make simple stuff. Roll up newspapers, put scotch tape on it, and then it become like a little ball, and you can use your hands to bat it, and then your kids can pick it up and then throw it back again. I mean, these are simple to do and safe, and actually it costs nothing, in that sense. Yeah.
Thank you, Associate Professor Chow, for sharing about how we can use different materials to create different sport equipment, and with that, children can also learn about sustainability, using recycled materials, and also
Exactly.
have fun exploring and creating their own personal equipment. Okay, for the next question, we have, how do I encourage my child to attempt a sport he or she dislikes? I think we can allow all three of you to share your own points and views, because it's all related to physical development. And I believe that children at a young age, they do have preference on certain sport they would like to try, or games that they prefer. So maybe we can, all of you can share, how can parents encourage their child to attempt a sport he or she dislikes? Maybe we can start with Dr. Catherine first.
Okay. For development perspective, I'd say go with what your child likes. First of all, go and encourage what your child likes. Now, if for some reason there's a sport your child dislikes, I would say maybe it would be good to find out why your child dislikes that sport in particular, and then maybe weigh it around why you'd like your kid to get into that sport, even if he or she dislikes it. And maybe a way for them to actually not stop disliking it is if they see you or other people around them actually engaging in there. Yeah.
I could have a step at this.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think Catherine's point is obviously very valid. Like, try to find out exactly why the child does not like to be involved in that sports, and I'll just unpeel or unpack it a little bit more from that point. And typically, a child would like to be involved in sports if it is fun, right? That's the basic thing. If it's not fun, they wouldn't want to be involved in it. So then you need to look at perhaps why is it not fun for the child. So there are many possible reasons. And again, I just unpack it a little bit. Sometimes it could be because it's just simply boring. Okay, maybe the game itself is boring, or they had to wait a long time to throw the ball, to catch the ball, to kick the ball. People are just lining up to in their sessions or in their practice sessions, and the wait time is so long, and the actual active time that the child is involved in is so small with reference to the total time that the child is at the practice session itself. And obviously, then it's not going to be fun for the child. Or if there are a lot of perhaps maybe what we term as physical work that is not relevant to the game itself, and the child may not see the fun aspect of it. Children would just want to play, right? They just want to get involved, and they just want to get involved playing with their friends that they just met, and just having to enjoy the session. So I think that should really be the foundation of their involvement in sports. So you need to look at why is it not fun, then see how you can mitigate that. And again, it's not about forcing the child. It's like going back to Catherine's point, right? It needs to be inherently fun for them, and find ways to make it enjoyable for the child. Yeah.
Thank you, Associate Professor Chow. But what about you, Dr. Miriam?
Yeah, I definitely agree with both of them. I would never force my child to do anything she dislikes. Maybe I can share a pilot program that we did in Sports Singapore. So there's this new program called the Active Start program, where we are trying to see how to make some of our programs a bit more age appropriate and engaging. And one of the sports that we are working with is hockey. So hockey is traditionally a very technical sport. You won't really introduce it to preschool children. But because some of my colleagues came to me to see, how can we make it more fun and engaging, we decided to work with them. And so I went to observe some of the sessions on the ground, and we noticed that, after the first hour was up, like children were giving the excuse of they want to go to the toilet and things like that. And definitely something was wrong on the ground. I mean, I guess, it really, like Jia Yi and Catherine shared, like we really need to unpack what was the issue. And I guess they probably weren't, one of the reasons probably was that they weren't having enough fun. Children really just want to play. Like you heard in the video earlier. And at this age, they just want to experience and want to be with their friends. And in the pilot that we did, we changed it up a bit. We introduced a little bit more variety, more fundamental movement skills. The hockey skills were learned through games. And the approach that we use really is allowing the child to explore. And the kids that came for the program really, really had fun. We interviewed some of them, we interviewed the coaches, and they noticed that the children were learning without knowing that they're learning. So they were learning implicitly. So really, if the children are not liking whatever they're doing, then perhaps, the program or the way it's taught is really something is wrong. And I would say don't force your child. Send them to another program, or send them to another sport, or just play with them. If you really have, for some reason, want them to learn that sport, then play with them. So because that parent-child bonding is really very valuable as well.
Thank you, Dr. Miriam. So so you the three of you all talk about finding out what are the child's likes and dislikes, and also respecting the child, and also finding out. And I believe as parents, they are role models. They also have to enjoy playing sports, or even start with simple small physical activities to keep them healthy and moving, to create a culture and a consistent routine of being outdoors and staying healthy. So thank you, speakers. And can we now I would like to invite the three of you to take a photo together. So smile. Okay, thank you so much. So we'd like to thank all of you for taking the time today to present now Preschool Parental Conference. And we have come to the end of our PCF Parental Conference 2021. A big thank you to all parents and speakers for joining us here today. We hope that you have picked up many helpful and practical strategies and tips along the way that can help you in raising healthy, resilient children. And if you have missed a segment or would like to recap some of the pointers, you can access the videos on our YouTube page at PAP Community Foundation. The videos will be available for a month. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a good weekend.
Thank you.